Italy's point for a second. Resolution number 2 and 4, because Russia brought up the combination of those, and Italy talked about penalties. This body has the capability of passing multiple resolutions, and just because 2 and 4 don't deal with penalties does not mean that they're still not just resolutions that could work effectively. They're dealing with economic issues, which are important. I think that for any of our countries to stop drug trafficking, drug production, grassroots programs, and indigenous programs, as I believe it's called in resolution number 4, indigenous capabilities, those have to be solidified and increased. No, this is a global problem, but it all stems from the smaller problems which happen in our countries. As in Myanmar, where 230 tons of heroin are trafficked or produced a year. So it all starts within your own country and implementing policies and initiatives that will solve the problem there. Again, I'd ask everyone to keep their minds open, although it might not be your personal policy, but leave your mind open and respect nations of Colombia, Mexico, and the Netherlands, although to some, such as the United States, their ideas might seem a little too liberal and not law-abiding, depending on what your laws are. I ask that you stay open to those and listen, because we are here to solve the problem with who knows how many solutions. And I yield the rest of my time to questions.
Okay, any questions for the delegate?
Okay.
Seeing none, Chair recognizes the United States of America.
First, I'd like to address some comments made by the delegate of Colombia. He basically attacked the morality of U.S. policy. I think first he needs to, to look at his own nation's policy, the power of his drug cartels, the weakness of his government. Also, I'd have to say, for the legalization, Netherlands basically was the founder of the harm reduction policy. In a way, I think that's kind of contradictory in itself. They have failed to recognize the harm inflicted by the use of these drugs. I'm in support of resolution number 4 and resolution number 2. Both address the many different aspects of drug use, whether it be transiting, producing, power of drug cartels and such. Resolution number 1, I think, may serve as a problem just due to the death penalty. I think that may be of some conflict considering the policies of the various nations represented here on death penalty and punishment for such offenses. I yield my time to questions.
Okay, are there any points of information for the delegate? Okay, seeing none. Delegate from Italy.
Hi. On behalf of resolution number 1, we are willing to scrap most of our ideas if you could include a few points that we would like to discuss. The first point is Italy and these countries in resolution 1, we would like to combine possibly with resolutions 2 and 4. Our first idea is we want to have excess wiretapping of suspected drug distributors, and the information obtained from these wiretaps would be sent to the United Nations to notify those affected countries about illegal trafficking, which is to take place in their jurisdiction. And our second point is to increase rehabilitation and treatment centers in the affected countries. Italy recommends that cash and other narcotic-related assets which are forfeited, the proceeds will be used to expand and fund the rehabilitation centers. So we would like to propose that we could get rid of resolution number 1 and somehow combine these 2 points in a combination of 2 and 4. And I'd like to speak to anyone in a caucus sometime. Thank you. I yield my time to questions.
Are there any questions for the delegate? Myanmar.
What policies or initiatives have you used in your own country to prevent mafia involvement or outside involvement?
We have excessive use of our parliament by restrictions in terms of money laundering and other things, and also we have complied with all the UN rules about not letting drugs into our country.
Russia?
In the resolution, the final resolution after resolutions 2 and 4 combined, you would have basically you're scrapping the idea of having the death penalty for traffickers. You're okay with that?
Yeah, we have to ensure that we can get some progress done in the next few days. Yes, we are willing to scrap that idea.
Delegate from the Netherlands.
In your resolution number 1, number 4, it says provide education and awareness in schools and communities. What do you plan to do in communities where they don't really have schools, they don't have enough money, and they're very poor, and they can't, afford school? What do you plan to do to aware them about the drug trafficking, like supposedly like maybe in Myanmar or Burma, where they don't have a lot of money?
Well, first of all, that would be a point that we would like to discuss with anyone. But in defense of that, this is a broad topic. We're talking about a UN task force possibly going into these countries and just making them aware of the problems of drugs and giving them reasons not to support the drug industry.
Thank you, Delegate. At this time, we have a guest speaker. Would the delegate from the Netherlands like to, or Pakistan, like to speak before the guest speaker? Okay, thank you. We'll have one more speaker before our guest arrives. Thank you. Delegate from Pakistan.
Pakistan, along with Singapore, would like to just make it aware that we are not in favor of dropping the death penalty from our policy, as Italy has said they are. But I'd also like to clarify that it's not, I think Russia mentioned that for first-time offense that was a little extreme, and I would definitely agree. I'm not talking about first-time offenses, and we're not talking about just little users or whatever. We're talking about major traffickers who are trafficking through, well, Pakistan has a huge trafficking problem, and we really want to put a stop to it. So we want to be very severe in our punishment. So to get the message across that we're not going to tolerate it anymore. So we just like to point out that we're not supporting resolution number 1 anymore.
Okay, thank you, Delegate. At this time, is there a motion to suspend the rules to allow for a guest speaker from the United Nations? Pakistan, to what point do you rise? Okay, those in favor?
No, 2 speakers for, 2
No, 2 speakers for and 2 speakers against. Okay, motion clearly passes. Thank you very much. This time?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Point of parliamentary inquiry. When are we voting on these resolutions?
We're going to vote on the resolutions probably tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay?
Can I speak tomorrow?
Okay. Mr. Messitte? Messitte. This is Mr. Messitte. He is from, I have your whole bio, and I left it back.
United Nations Drug Control Program.
Thank you.
I'm incredibly impressed. You guys have done an excellent job, and all the countries that participate strongly in United Nations drug control questions are represented, and you've captured the spirit of UN drug control perfectly. So you should give yourselves a pat on the back and your teachers as well, because it's terrific. It's really outstanding. And I'm going to share what you've done here today with my colleagues in Vienna, Austria, where our headquarters is. This past summer, we had something very similar to what you're doing here today. We had a United Nations General Assembly special session on the world drug problem. Had a lot of the same questions that you're debating, this concept of a balanced approach towards drug control, that you look at reducing demand, reducing supply, and law enforcement questions, and you've captured that very nicely. I'm particularly impressed by the concept of reducing consumption that several of you spoke about already this morning. Obviously, nobody in this classroom is growing coca or is involved in trafficking of drugs, but perhaps you've had some experimentation in terms of you've seen drugs in the community, and this idea that Americans have a responsibility to reducing consumption is very important. When I was a senior in high school, not all that long ago, I grew up in Maryland, and in my senior year of high school, a famous basketball player, Len Bias, died. Many of you may know who who he was. He was compared to Michael Jordan as really one of the great basketball players of our age. Since that time, since 1987, drug consumption in the United States for cocaine has dropped from 6 million abusers a month to just under 2 million. So there's a real belief, I think, among the countries of the world that where demand is a problem, that consumption can be reduced, that drugs are not an endemic part of our society. They're not something that are always going to be with us. And what you're doing here today, I just think is so terrific because it encapsulates in many ways what the various countries are dealing with. You have Myanmar and Afghanistan, I guess, was absent today, but those two countries produce 90% of the world's poppy that goes towards the production of heroin. You have Bolivia, Colombia, and Peru, which produce 99% of the world's cocaine. And then you have the various countries of Western Europe and of North America that are the primary consumer countries. So you've really encapsulated the debate that's going on at the world level, and it's very impressive. Now I'm open to take various questions from you if you have them. USA.
What course of study and action did you take to become a member?
Did I? Well, I attended a high school much like this outside Washington, D.C., and then after college, I worked on Capitol Hill for a United States senator, and then went to graduate school in international relations, and there are several very good programs around the country. I actually studied in Italy for a year when I was in graduate school, and then worked in television at CNN in Washington, and then got to know some people at the United Nations. And I'm actually a speechwriter and a communications director of the UN drug control program. But there are lots of different paths that you could take to get involved in various fields of international affairs. And the UN, of course, is spread all over the world. It's most visible to you because their headquarters is in New York, but there are UN employees who are in developing countries, who are stationed in Geneva and in Vienna, the other two big headquarters in Europe. So there are lots of opportunities in the field of drug control and in the field of development and peacekeeping and so forth.
Do you see the role of the UN expanding or shrinking as the test time goes on in the future?
In drug control or in everything?
Both.
Well, in drug control, I definitely think that it's going to expand, and you've already seen this. This past summer, the countries that came together, the 185 member states of the UN, decided that by the year 2008, they had to make a significant reduction in the production and consumption of illegal drugs. Between now and 2008, there are a series of goals and strategies that must be met in 2-year increments where they have to report back and say, we've come this far, we still have this far to go. So there's clearly going to be an increasing role for the United Nations in international drug control. I think the same is true on the world stage as well. You find that many problems today that once were isolated to one country or one region are global. Economics are increasingly linked, communication is increasingly linked, and problems are increasingly affect everybody. So I think the United Nations will also play a much greater role in the years to come.
Do you see a large, I guess, this discussion about creating an international police force, so-called, and like international laws on drugs? Well,
with regards to international police force, you have to be careful because the United Nations doesn't step upon the sovereignty of any one country. It's there to encourage countries to meet standards and goals, to provide a forum like this one for countries to come together and discuss the best ways to move forward. But in terms of creating a super police force, I don't think that's something that's in the future of the United Nations. With regards to international drug control, there is some talk within our organization that there should be a global monitoring system where countries can come independently using satellite technology, using ground surveys, and get an independent, non-biased assessment of what's going on in Colombia, what's going on in Pakistan, and that the data that would be produced by the United Nations could be shared with that country, Pakistan, and with all countries.
And then it would be on the hand of Pakistan to deal with that.
That's right. I mean, and the pressure then of the international community to say to Pakistan or Colombia or whatever country, you have the responsibility to reduce your production by this amount by the year 2004. Similarly, you could say the same thing about the United States. You could say you have a responsibility to reduce your consumption of drugs by such and such a year. I mean, the statistics still say that the United States makes up 4% of the world's population and consumes almost 50% of the world's drugs.
Does your drug control program, do you have like a good relationship with countries like Colombia? Or is it?
Very good relationship with countries like Colombia, because once again, the UN comes into, we have a field office in Bogota, and we work there on you're a nonpartisan organization. You don't come in with an agenda. You're not the United States, or you're not a foreign country coming in to work. You're an international organization in which Colombians are a part of the organization. So we do have a very good relationship with countries like Colombia.
A few of us participated in a lot of United Nations conference this weekend, and I was in the HOOP committee, and we debated the issue of needle exchange, and I know that it's now like such implementations have now become popular in like Australia and Canada and Netherlands and stuff. And though there are programs like that in the U.S., it's not supported by the government. I was just wondering what your
It's a very good question, and as is the question, and there was some talk about it already in the class this morning, of legalization of marijuana. These are questions that are being debated within the international community. Right now, I think the general feeling is that there is not enough support for those issues at the international level. But it's being debated, as you debated it here this morning. There are groups within countries that believe that issue should be debated at the international level. So you've definitely hit upon two issues that are currently beginning to have some debate. And there of course are two sides to the story on all of these issues. There are people who, no one has a monopoly on the truth. There are people who believe that legalization does deserve to be heard, and there are others who say that it's a gateway drug and it should not.
Passed. I know that, I mean, there's 20 of us and we're all like acting in the role of our delegates. I mean, how hard is it to actually get something passed? And then once it's passed, for those countries who didn't really vote on it, do they tend to follow the resolution that's passed?
Well, again, it's a good question. I sat one night for 16 hours in a debate in Vienna over precisely this kind of thing, over exact phrasing of resolutions within the political declaration against drugs, where people were really debating the placement of the and things like that, so that it's very difficult. The second part of your question, which was?
Once the resolution is passed, for those countries who didn't vote on that resolution, do they tend to follow whatever was passed?
It's, once again, these are what the UN does. There are guidelines and their goals and their strategies. The UN can't send a police force in to make anyone comply with anything. There can be the pressure of the international community for countries to live up to what they've signed on to do, but there's no enforcement mechanism. It's only this concept of pressure.
Done with money laundering regulations? Is there any kind of international standards for money laundering, trying to follow the flows of cash?
Absolutely, and I saw, and it was interesting, and well done to your Italian delegate who raised this question in the debate, that Italy has been one of the leaders in trying to bring the question of money laundering to the international level. We have in the United Nations program, we have a global program against money laundering that focuses solely on this question. At this special session of the General Assembly last summer against drugs, there was a special resolution passed to countries to live up to a certain international standard, that there would be laws in place where banks should know your customer, know who is depositing money in inside bank accounts. But it's a difficult problem because right now people say that the international drug market is worth $500 billion a year, and much of that money then is laundered through and becomes legal. So it's a difficult problem to deal with, particularly when you're dealing with money that moves at the speed of sound through the push of a computer button. But there is a growing international consensus that something should be done and can be done to combat it.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I think
you.
the period is just about over. I would like to thank the delegates. Okay, excellent job by the delegates. Is there a motion for a